The radio crackled through the desert silence at 3:47 hours, carrying a voice that would haunt Major Victor Kozlov for the rest of his life. Dustoff 77, this is Hawkeye 12. I have visual on your convoy. You've got company coming fast from the northeast ridge. The transmission cut through static like a blade through silk, calm and precise, but something was wrong. The voice was too steady, too controlled for someone supposedly flying close air support in the middle of a sandstorm that had grounded every other aircraft in the theater. Kozlov squinted through his night vision goggles at the empty sky above their stalled convoy of medical vehicles. Sand whipped across the highway in ghostly sheets, visibility near zero. His Humvee's radio operator, Sergeant Mills, checked the frequency twice. "Sir, that transmission came from Grid Square 34T FQ 892-456. That's directly above us, but there's nothing on thermal or radar." The major had seen combat in 3 theaters, commanded convoys through the most dangerous corridors in Afghanistan, and survived 2 IED attacks that left him with a permanent limp and a Purple Heart he never talked about. He knew the sound of aircraft engines, could identify the difference between a Chinook's twin rotors and an Apache's tail rotor from 5 clicks away. But now, straining his ears against the howling wind, he heard only silence punctuated by the occasional crack of settling metal from their vehicles. "Negative, Hawkeye 12, Kozlov transmitted back, skepticism bleeding through his professional tone. "We show no friendly aircraft in this sector. Weather's got everything grounded at Fob Archer. Identify yourself and your aircraft type." The response came immediately, delivered with the kind of bone-dry humor that made seasoned soldiers either laugh or reach for their sidearms. "Copy that, Dustoff 77. Aircraft type is one very stubborn warthog, and I'm about to demonstrate why they call us the Flying Tanks. Suggest your people keep their heads down in approximately 30 seconds." Kozlov felt his jaw tight. A-10 Thunderbolts were ground attack aircraft, not some mythical hovering platform. They were fast, brutal, and loud as freight trains when they made gun runs. They didn't float silently above convoys in sandstorms like mechanical guardian angels. "Hawkeye 12, that's impossible. A-10s can't hover, and nothing's flying in this weather." The laugh that came through his headset was soft, almost musical, completely at odds with the deadly seriousness of their situation. "Major, respectfully, you might want to look up." That's when Major Victor Kozlov learned that some pilots don't follow the rules of physics. They negotiate with them. And some stories begin not with explosions or gunfire, but with the impossible sight of 30,000 pounds of aircraft floating motionless against a storm-dark sky, defying everything he thought he knew about war, flight, and the woman behind the call sign who was about to save his life. The first indication something extraordinary was happening came not through sight or sound, but through the subtle vibration that ran through the ground beneath their vehicles. Kozlov felt it in his chest first, a low-frequency thrumming that seemed to emanate from the very air around them. The sensation was familiar yet wrong, like hearing a lullaby played in a minor key. Sergeant Mills was the first to spot it. "Jesus Christ, sir, look at your 2 o'clock, about 300 feet up." His voice carried the kind of reverent whisper usually reserved for cathedrals or crime scenes. Through the swirling sand, a shape materialized that defied comprehension. The A-10 Thunderbolt hung motionless in the storm, its twin engines somehow maintaining position against winds that were clocking 45 knots. The aircraft appeared to be floating, its nose angled slightly downward in what pilots call an aggressive hunting posture. Even in the limited visibility, Kozlov could make out the distinctive profile. The straight wings, the engines mounted high on the fuselage, and the massive GAU-8 cannon protruding from the nose like the stinger of some mechanical wasp. "That's not possible," whispered Corporal Jackson from the lead medical vehicle. His voice carried over the convoy's shared frequency, tinged with the kind of awe usually reserved for witnessing miracles or natural disasters. But there it was, hanging in space like a 30-foot-long middle finger pointed at the laws of aerodynamics. The A-10's landing lights cut through the sandstorm in measured sweeps, painting the desert floor in moving pools of white brilliance. Each pass revealed more detail: the aircraft's weathered paint job, the subtle adjustments of its control surfaces as it maintained its impossible hover, and most unsettling of all, the complete absence of the roar that should have accompanied such a display of raw engine power. Kozlov keyed his radio with hands that had remained steady through mortar attacks and firefights, but now trembled slightly. Hawkeye 1-2, how in hell are you maintaining that position? My instruments show wind speeds that should be tossing you around like a paper airplane. The response came through with crystal clarity, as if the pilot was sitting in the seat beside him, rather than floating 300 feet overhead in a machine that weighed more than 2 school buses. Trade secret, Major. But if you're done questioning the impossible, you might want to focus on the very possible threat approaching from your northeast at about 2 clicks and closing fast. As if summoned by her words, the distinctive sound of diesel engines and tracked vehicles began to cut through the storm's howl. Kozlov's night vision picked up the heat signatures first. 3 vehicles moving in tactical formation across the rocky terrain, their thermal profiles suggesting BTR-80 armored personnel carriers. The kind of equipment that shouldn't exist in this theater, operated by people who officially weren't there. Hawkeye 1-2, I count 3 armored vehicles, unknown nationality, approaching our position. We're a medical convoy, minimal defensive capability. Kozlov's voice carried the professional calm of a man who had learned to compartmentalize fear into a box he could deal with later. Above them, the A-10 shifted slightly, its nose swinging toward the approaching threat with the mechanical precision of a gun turret. The pilot's voice, when it came, carried a note of something that might have been anticipation. Copy that, Dustoff 7-7. I see them. 3 BTRs, approximately 40 personnel, small arms, and what looks like a 30 autocannon on the lead vehicle. Permission to engage. Negative, Hawkeye 1-2. We need positive identification before. The transmission was interrupted by the sharp crack of rifle fire. Muzzle flashes sparked from the approaching vehicles like deadly fireflies, and rounds began impacting around the convoy. The ambush had begun. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. One moment, the A-10 hung motionless like a mechanical angel. The next, it had become something altogether more predatory. The aircraft rolled inverted with fluid grace, its engines finally revealing their true voice as they spooled up to combat power. The sound was like standing inside a tornado made of jet fuel and barely contained violence. Dustoff 7-7, this is Hawkeye 1-2 going hot. Danger close, keep your heads down and your people in their vehicles. The pilot's voice had changed, stripped of humor, and filled with the kind of cold professionalism that made careers in close air support. I'm coming in from the south, gun run in 30 seconds. Kozlov watched through his night vision as the A-10 lined up its attack run with geometric precision. The aircraft had dropped to barely 50 feet above the desert floor, its engines screaming as it accelerated toward the enemy vehicles. At this range, he could see details that no ground soldier should ever witness. The way the plane's control surfaces made minute adjustments as it tracked its targets, the deliberate steadiness of its approach, and most unnervingly, the complete absence of any defensive maneuvering. The pilot was flying straight into enemy fire without deviation, trusting in her aircraft's legendary durability and her own skill to carry her through. It was either supreme confidence or calculated insanity, and in the moment before the guns opened up, Kozlov realized he was about to witness something that would redefine his understanding of both. The GAU-8 cannon spoke with the voice of industrial death. The sound wasn't like the movies, no dramatic roar or heroic crescendo. Instead, it was the mechanical grinding of a massive zipper being opened and closed at superhuman speed, each burst lasting exactly 2 seconds, and delivering 70 rounds of 30 depleted uranium into targets that had, moments before, seemed invincible. The lead BTR simply disintegrated. One moment it was a 8-wheeled armored vehicle weighing 14 tons. The next it was expanding cloud of metal fragments and burning diesel fuel. The A-10's cannon had struck its center mass, the depleted uranium rounds punching through the vehicle's armor like tissue paper before detonating the ammunition inside. Kozlov felt the shockwave roll across the desert floor, a physical pressure that made his ears pop and set off every car alarm in the convoy. Through his night vision, he watched the remaining 2 BTRs attempt evasive maneuvers, their drivers clearly understanding they were no longer the predators in this engagement. "Splash 1," came the pilot's voice, clinical and precise. "2 targets remaining, they're trying to break contact." The A-10 had completed its gun run and was already banking hard left, pulling what had to be 6 GS in a maneuver that should have been impossible at such low altitude. The aircraft's titanium bathtub, the armored cockpit that protected its pilot, glinted in the light of the burning BTR as it came around for a second pass. But something was wrong. Kozlov could see tracer rounds reaching up from the surviving vehicles, green streaks of light that seemed to be finding their target. The A-10 was taking hits, sparks cascading from its right engine and wing, yet it continued its turn with mechanical precision. "Hawkeye 1-2, you're taking fire. Break off and gain altitude," Kozlov transmitted, surprised by the concern in his own voice. The response came back steady as bedrock. "Negative, dust off 7-7. These people shot at a medical convoy. That makes this personal." There was something in her voice now, something that spoke of old wounds and older anger. "Besides, warthogs don't break off. We break things." The second gun run was different from the first. Where the initial attack had been precise and surgical, this one carried the weight of deliberate judgment. The A-10 came in lower, slower, its cannon tracking the second BTR with the patience of a hunter who has all the time in the world and prey that has nowhere to run. The burst was shorter this time, more controlled. The BTR lurched to one side, its left wheels destroyed, before rolling twice and coming to rest upside down against a cluster of rocks. No secondary explosions this time, but no movement either. The third vehicle had seen enough. Kozlov watched through his night vision as it reversed course, throwing up clouds of sand as it fled northeast toward whatever hole it had crawled out of. The A-10 could have pursued, could have added a third kill to its tally, but instead it pulled up and began a slow orbit over the convoy. "Dust off 7-7, this is Hawkeye 1-2. Area secure, 3 enemies engaged, 2 destroyed, 1 in retreat. How's your situation down there?" The engagement had lasted less than 4 minutes from first contact to ceasefire, but Kozlov felt like he'd aged a decade. His hands were steady now, the adrenaline settling into the familiar post-combat clarity that came with survival. "Hawkeye 1-2, no casualties down here. Your timing was..." He paused, searching for words that seemed adequate. "Your timing was perfect." The laugh that came through his headset was different now, warmer somehow. "Just doing my job, Major, though I have to ask, do you still think A-10s can't hover?" Despite everything, the impossible hovering, the precision gunnery, the fact that he just witnessed what amounted to aerial magic, Kozlov found himself smiling. "I'm prepared to revise my position on that subject, Hawkeye 1-2. What's your actual call sign, pilot? And how did you know we needed help?" There was a pause, filled only by the sound of twin turbofans maintaining their lazy orbit overhead. When the voice came back, it carried weight that spoke of stories untold and prices paid in full. "Call signs Phantom, Major. Captain Zara Nightingale, 442nd Fighter Wing out of Davis-Monthan. As for how I knew..." Another pause, longer this time. "Let's just say I make it my business to keep an eye on medical convoys in this sector. You people save lives. That makes you worth saving." The name hit Kozlov like a physical blow. Everyone in theater had heard of Phantom, the A-10 pilot who flew impossible missions, appeared where she couldn't possibly be, and had a kill record that made seasoned fighter jocks shake their heads in disbelief. But the stories painted her as some kind of ghost, a legend that existed more in rumor than reality. "Your Phantom." Sergeant Mills had been listening to the conversation, and his voice carried the kind of reverence usually reserved for discussing Medal of Honor recipients. "Ma'am, you're supposed to be mythical." "Myths don't bleed, Sergeant, and I've been bleeding for 3 tours now." Her voice carried a note of weariness that spoke of missions flown and prices paid. "But that's a conversation for another time. Major, you need to get your convoy moving. That third BTR's probably calling for backup, and I can't hover over you indefinitely." Kozlov was already giving hand signals to his drivers, the convoy preparing to resume movement toward their destination, a forward aid station where wounded soldiers waited for medical supplies that could mean the difference between life and death. "Copy that, Phantom. We'll be rolling in 2 minutes." "Good. I'll escort you to the checkpoint at grid 34T FQ 910-480, then I need to return to base. My bird took some hits during that engagement, and I want to get her checked out before anything important falls off." As the convoy began moving, Kozlov found himself looking up at the A-10, maintaining its protective orbit overhead. The aircraft showed signs of battle damage, scorch marks along the fuselage, what looked like bullet holes in the right wing, but it flew with the steady confidence of a machine that had been built to take punishment and keep fighting. "Phantom," he transmitted, "permission to ask a personal question." "Go ahead, Major." "How long have you been flying like this? I mean, really flying, not just by the book." The pause stretched long enough that Kozlov wondered if the transmission had been lost. When Phantom's voice came back, it carried echoes of something that might have been grief. "Since my brother died in a convoy just like yours, Major. Since I learned that sometimes the only way to save people is to become something the enemy can't predict, can't plan for, can't understand. Sometimes you have to become a ghost." The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre, carrying weight that spoke of transformations both chosen and forced. Kozlov understood in that moment that he wasn't just being escorted by a pilot. He was witnessing the result of someone who had taken loss and forged it into something that could reach out and touch the enemy from impossible ranges, in impossible ways. As they approached the checkpoint, the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The sandstorm was finally beginning to dissipate, revealing a landscape that looked like the surface of an alien world, rocky, desolate, beautiful in its harshness. The A-10 above them caught the first rays of sunlight on its wings, transforming from a shadow into something solid and real. For the first time, Kozlov could see the aircraft clearly. The careful maintenance despite obvious battle damage, the extra fuel tanks that explained its extended range, and painted just below the cockpit, a small symbol that made his breath catch in his throat. It was a stylized angel, wings spread in protection, but instead of a halo, the figure wore a pilot's helmet. Below it, in small, precise letters, were the words Guardian Angel KIA 15032019, followed by a name. LT, Marcus Nightingale. Everything clicked into place. The impossible flying, the perfect timing, the way she spoke about medical convoys with personal investment. Phantom wasn't just a call sign. It was a promise made over a grave, a vow that no other convoy would die the way her brothers had. "Checkpoint in sight, Phantom," Kozlov transmitted. "We can take it from here." "Roger that, Dustoff 77. Safe travels, Major. And Major, next time someone tells you something's impossible, you might want to consider that they just haven't met the right pilot yet." The A-10 peeled away in a climbing turn, its engines finally revealing their full voice as they carried Phantom home. Kozlov watched until the aircraft was just a speck against the growing light, then keyed his radio one final time. "Phantom, Dustoff 77, thank you." The response came faint and distant, already stretching across miles of empty desert. "Thank my brother, Major. I'm just keeping a promise." And then she was gone, leaving only the memory of impossible flight and the knowledge that some legends are born not from stories, but from the ashes of those who couldn't be saved. The convoy reached its destination without further incident, delivering medical supplies that would save dozens of lives over the following weeks. But for Major Viktor Kozlov, the real cargo delivered that night was something else entirely. The understanding that heroism isn't about following rules or staying within acceptable parameters. Sometimes, heroism is about becoming exactly what the situation demands. Consequences be damned. Sometimes it's about taking the weight of the impossible onto your shoulders and carrying it until it becomes possible through sheer force of will. And sometimes, on clear desert nights when the wind carries the distant sound of turbofan engines, heroism sounds exactly like someone keeping a promise to the dead by protecting the living, one impossible flight at a time. The story of that night would spread through the ranks like wildfire, gaining embellishments and losing details with each telling, until it became just another legend in a war full of legends. But for those who were there, who felt the ground shake under the GAU-8's voice and watched an A-10 hover like a mechanical hummingbird, the story needed no embellishment. They had witnessed something that existed in the space between physics and faith, between what was possible and what was necessary. They had met Phantom, and in meeting her, had touched something that reminded them why they wore the uniform in the first place. Not for glory or politics or abstract concepts of duty, but for the simple, brutal, beautiful truth that some things are worth dying for. And sometimes, if you're very skilled and very lucky and very determined, some things are worth living impossibly for as well. Years later, when Kozlov had retired and was telling the story to his grandchildren, he would always end the same way. "The funny thing about impossible," he would say, "is that it's only impossible until someone decides it isn't." And that night, in the middle of a sandstorm where nothing was supposed to fly, I learned that some people don't ask permission from the impossible. They just smile and do it anyway. The legacy of that night lived on in other ways too. The 442nd Fighter Wing began receiving requests for impossible missions, and somehow, they kept accomplishing them. Young pilots would arrive at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base asking to fly with Phantom, to learn from the woman who had redefined what an A-10 could do in the right hands. But Captain Zara Nightingale, call sign Phantom, remained elusive. She flew when she was needed, appeared where the situation demanded, and disappeared back into the vast desert sky like smoke on the wind. Her aircraft bore the scars of 100 impossible missions, and her logbook read like a catalog of tactical innovations that shouldn't have worked but somehow always did. The mechanics who maintained her aircraft spoke of her with the kind of reverence usually reserved for saints or supernatural phenomena. They would find her A-10 returned from missions with damage that should have brought it down, yet every system still functional, every critical component somehow intact. It was as if the aircraft itself had inherited something of its pilot's refusal to accept limitations. New pilots would ask the old-timers about her techniques, about how she achieved the impossible hovering that had become her signature. The answers were always the same. She doesn't fight physics. She negotiates with it, and somehow physics always listens. But perhaps the most fitting tribute to that night came not from official commendations or medals, but from something simpler and more profound. Medical convoys throughout the theater began reporting improved survival rates, fewer successful ambushes, and an unexplained sense of security when traveling through the most dangerous sectors. They couldn't always see her, couldn't always hear the distinctive sound of her engines, but somehow they knew. Phantom was watching. The guardian angel painted on her fuselage wasn't just memorial art. It was a promise made manifest, flying endless patrols in a sky that had become both sanctuary and battlefield. And in the end, That was perhaps the most important lesson of all, that some promises are too important to be limited by the possible, and some guardians are too determined to be contained by the laws that govern ordinary flight. Sometimes, when the need is great enough and the cause is just enough, the impossible becomes just another tool in the hands of someone who has learned to fly not with their wings, but with their will. The desert wind still carries echoes of that night, when Major Viktor Kozlov learned that A-10s could hover and discovered that legends sometimes have call signs. And somewhere, in the vast expanse of sky above convoys that carry life to those who need it most, Phantom continues to fly her impossible missions, keeping a promise that death couldn't break and time cannot diminish. She remains what she chose to become that day she lost her brother, proof that love, properly applied, can achieve anything, even flight that defies physics in service of those who cannot fight for themselves. The sky remembers, the desert remembers, and somewhere in the space between the possible and the necessary, Captain Zara Nightingale continues to demonstrate that some things are more important than the laws of aerodynamics. Some things are worth becoming impossible for.